Fuck, I can't. The words came out as barely more than a breath, not directed at anyone, not asked of anyone. Just the exhaust from a machine that had been running past the point it should have stopped, finally venting into a room too empty to receive it. Willow Bennett had been in the same chair for 11 hours. The overhead lights had shifted to their automatic night setting an hour ago, dimming the floor to something between functional and humane, leaving only the cold blue-white glow of monitor screens and the low, continuous hum of the HVAC system that never quite made the building warm in January. Her back ached at the base. Her right wrist carried a dull, specific throb from mousing through spreadsheet cells for the fourth consecutive pass. On the screen in front of her, 847 lines, 23 inconsistencies, each one cascading into 3 more every time she corrected the first. The new payroll system, pushed through by the board in November, deployed in December with an 11-day testing window instead of the required 30, was attempting to migrate benefits data while the quarterly payroll closing ran in parallel. No one had planned for the two processes to collide. Someone should have planned. Someone did. Willow, 6 weeks ago, in a formal email with 3 attached documents and a projected risk assessment that took her 2 evenings to write. The email was read. It was archived. It received no response. Now it was 11:47 p.m., and her phone buzzed against the desk. Her mother. 3rd call of the day. Willow let it move to voicemail without touching the screen. At 11:51 p.m., Marcus Reeves, CFO, at home, authority badge safely tucked somewhere warm, sent 4 words. This needs to be ready. No question mark. No acknowledgement of the 11 hours she'd already put in. Just a demand, clean and impersonal. The way you send a command to a function, not a message to a person. She looked at the spreadsheet, picked up her coffee and drank. Set it back down. Realized, a beat too late, that it had been cold for over an hour. She had not noticed until now. That small fact, the cold coffee, the automatic gesture, the absence of any moment in which she had stopped long enough to feel something before doing it, landed somewhere precise. Weeks of being everyone's load-bearing wall without a wall to lean on herself. It didn't announce itself. It simply gave. Quietly and completely. The way a thing fails not from a single blow but from the cumulative weight it was never designed to carry alone. Her hand stopped over the mouse. Her breath shortened. Her eyes burned dry. And from somewhere she did not often let surface, a version of herself that existed before the title, before the competence, before the careful armor of it, came 2 words she almost didn't recognize as her own. I can't. Logan Park heard it. He was at the cluster of desks 8 feet away, reviewing integration logs with one earbud in and the other resting against his collar. He was the kind of person who didn't make things larger than they needed to be. He didn't stand quickly, didn't make a face. He finished the line he was reading, closed his laptop, and then, without asking whether he could, he pulled his chair across to her desk, sat beside her, looked at the screen for 3 seconds, and said, with the calm of someone who was not performing composure, but simply had it, "Then we do it together." Willow looked at him. He was not looking back. He already had his glasses adjusted and his fingers on the keyboard, pulling the first inconsistency from the list toward the technical layer that belonged to him. She didn't say, "Thank you," didn't say anything. She turned back to her monitor and opened the next cell. For the first time in longer than she could honestly measure, she was not alone inside something she had been carrying entirely by herself. The question that lingered in the space between their desks, quiet, unresolved, unasked, was simple. When all of this was over, what would happen to whatever was beginning here? If you've ever been the person everyone calls when something breaks, you know exactly what she's feeling right now. Stories like this one exist because you listen. Subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss what comes next. Dar. 6 weeks before the collapse, the floor smelled like overheated printer toner and someone's microwaved lunch from 3 hours prior. Willow Bennett had been at her desk since 7:15 a.m., and by the time the building started to empty after 6 p.m., she was still there, cursor blinking in a draft that had taken most of the afternoon to get right. The subject line read, Migration Risk Assessment, Q4 Payroll System Transition. Willow's job was payroll coordination for a network of 14 community health clinics spread across the Chicago metro area. 847 employees across those clinics, nurses, technicians, receptionists, coordinators, facilities staff. When the payroll ran clean, none of them thought about her. When the payroll ran wrong, they knew immediately. A nurse's direct deposit delayed on the same day her electricity bill auto-drafted. A medical assistant's health insurance lapsing for 48 hours because a benefit assignment hadn't processed correctly. The weight of Willow's work was not abstract. It was entirely, specifically human, and she carried its specificity in the part of her chest she never showed at meetings. She had spent 2 evenings on the attached documents. Not because anyone asked her to, but because she had seen the implementation timeline for the new benefits system and done the math herself. The rollout window overlapped directly with the quarterly payroll close. It was not a catastrophic overlap. It was a manageable one, if someone planned for it. If the migration was paused for 48 hours during the closing window, the conflict disappeared entirely. A small, technical, entirely preventable problem. She attached 3 documents. The timeline comparison, a technical conflict summary she'd written in language a non-technical CFO could read, and a suggested protocol for phased implementation. She wrote the email carefully. Direct, no hedging, no over-explanation. Then she sent it to Marcus Reeves, copied the IT project manager, and went back to the quarterly pre-close report she'd been building since Monday. She was the last person on the floor. She tied her hair into a low bun at 7 p.m. without thinking about it. The automatic gesture of someone settling in for the long part of a day. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead. The coffee machine on the 4th floor had given her something lukewarm and too bitter at 4 p.m., and she'd finished it anyway. It was at 7:23 p.m. that she first noticed Logan Park. He had been there all afternoon, the systems integration analyst 2 rows over, slightly to the left, unremarkable in the landscape of the open floor plan, in the way that people are when they work quietly and without performance. But at 7:23 p.m., he walked past her desk on the way to the kitchenette and returned 2 minutes later holding 2 cups from the floor's coffee machine. He set one on his desk. The other he placed, without a word, on the far corner of her desk, not close enough to feel like an intrusion, not far enough to feel like an afterthought. Then he sat back down and opened his laptop. Willow looked at the cup, looked at the back of his head. He was already reading something on his screen. She pulled the cup toward her and drank without comment. It was bad coffee. It was also warm. She thought nothing of it at the time. It was a small office kindness. The floor was almost empty. People did that. She went home at 8:45 p.m. 6 days later, an automated response from Marcus's assistant arrived. Thank you for your message. Marcus is currently in the quarterly board prep cycle and will respond when available. He never responded. The email sat in her sent folder, unacknowledged, time-stamped, thorough, and irrelevant to anyone but the person who'd written it. On a Tuesday morning 6 weeks after that, Willow arrived at 6:45 a.m. to find an automated system alert in her inbox with a subject line that put a cold weight in her stomach. Critical. Payroll migration conflict. Benefits data integrity error. 314 employee records affected. She read it once. Then she opened her sent folder, pulled up the email from 6 weeks ago, and read the 3rd paragraph. If migration proceeds without a close window pause, the system will attempt concurrent data operations with a high probability of benefits record corruption affecting between 200 and 400 employee accounts. She closed the folder, opened the alert, and got to work. Her phone buzzed at 7:58 a.m. Marcus Reeves. How bad? She typed her response without editorial. A structured 4-sentence assessment. Scope confirmed. Timeline critical. Triage already begun. Then she sent it and turned back to her screen. His reply arrived in under a minute. Fix it. She already was. By 9 a.m., the floor had the particular energy of a controlled fire. Everyone could feel the heat. Most were trying to appear unaffected. and only one person was actually doing anything about it. Willow had a triage plan built before the second cup of coffee. She'd contacted the IT project manager at 7:10 a.m., requested a temporary read-only lock on the benefits migration module, and begun a manual audit of the 314 flagged records. The problem was structural. The new system had written partially processed data on top of existing clean records before timing out, leaving a layer of incomplete benefit assignments sitting on top of correct ones. Fixing it required extracting the partial overwrites, restoring the originals from the backup snapshot taken at 11 p.m. the night before, and then manually reconciling the 63 records that had changed legitimately between 11 p.m. and the failure point. This was not a problem without a solution. It was a problem with a specific, time-intensive, non-delegatable solution, and payroll closed in 48 hours. When colleagues arrived and began asking questions, Willow answered them with the efficiency of someone who needed the conversation to be short. She had already sent a summary to the department heads. She had already drafted a status update for Marcus. She had a prioritized task list and a color-coded audit tracker open on her second monitor. The only thing she needed right now was fewer people talking at her. Around her, the floor performed its crisis in the usual ways. People gathered in small clusters near the coffee station, speaking in the urgent, slightly elevated tones of people who are concerned, but not the ones responsible for fixing it. There was relief in that gathering, Willow had noticed over the years, a social comfort and shared alarm that had nothing to do with solving anything. She had stopped participating in those clusters around the time she turned 27, when she realized that the time spent in them was time she could spend actually closing the gap. Danny Cole arrived at 9:20 a.m., coffee in one hand, oversized cardigan already threatening to slip off one shoulder, and read the room in approximately 5 seconds. She pulled up her chair, set her mug on the desk beside Willow's keyboard, close enough to be an offering, not close enough to be in the way, and said simply, "Tell me what I can do." Willow told her. Specific task, specific parameters, specific output format. Danny asked one clarifying question, then started working. It was the only time that day Willow asked for help. By noon, the scope was confirmed and slightly worse than originally projected. The backup snapshot contained a 4-minute gap that had swallowed 11 records entirely. Those 11 needed to be reconstructed from paper benefit enrollment forms filed at HR. Someone would need to go to the 4th floor and physically locate 11 folders. Danny volunteered before Willow finished the sentence. At 3:30 p.m., Logan Park appeared at the edge of Willow's peripheral vision, not approaching, just present, reviewing something on his laptop while seated at his own desk in a way that felt, somehow, like attentiveness. He had been in and out of the floor all day. She'd noticed his absence more than she'd expected to. She didn't examine why. At 4:03 p.m., Marcus sent a calendar invitation to Willow, the VP of Operations, 3 department heads, and, at the bottom of the list, added last, almost as an afterthought, Logan Park. Subject: Payroll System Crisis, Emergency Review. Tomorrow, 8 a.m. Willow accepted the invitation, went back to the audit tracker, updated the status from 41 records cleared to 72. Her coffee was cold again. She drank it without noticing. Sependor. The conference room on the 3rd floor had fluorescent lighting that made everything look slightly more serious than it was, which was, Willow suspected, exactly why Marcus had chosen it. He arrived 2 minutes early, which meant he arrived before everyone else by design, and was standing at the head of the table when the others filed in. His presentation was clean. 12 slides, corporate blue color scheme, problem framing, impact summary, resolution pathway, owner assignments. The word unforeseen appeared on slide 3, embedded in a sentence that described the migration conflict as an unforeseen system interaction consistent with the complexity of enterprise-level deployment. Not one slide mentioned the email from 6 weeks ago. Not one sentence acknowledged that the conflict had been projected, documented, and reported before it became a crisis. Marcus presented the problem as a surprise that the company was navigating competently, a narrative that required the incident to have no prior warning, which meant it required that the email did not exist in any publicly acknowledged form. The CFO standing at the head of a conference room with a silver pen in his hand was not lying, technically. He was simply curating. Willow sat 4 chairs down the table, hands flat on the surface, face professionally neutral. The email was on her phone, in her jacket pocket, 3 inches from her right hand. She did not take it out. She had made that decision at 6 a.m., while sitting on the train in the January dark with frost on the windows. She had weighed the cost of the confrontation, the professional fallout, the optics of challenging Marcus in front of the VP, the way it would get filed as difficult in a mental file that followed you quietly, against the cost of silence, which she already knew the shape of. She had made the calculation, and she did not like either side of the scale. So she had let the phone stay in her pocket and walked into the building with her bun high and her face ready. Logan was at the back of the room. He had been added to the meeting late and had taken the last chair, slightly removed from the table, the position of someone whose role was technical and whose presence was informational. He had a legal pad and a pen. He was not using either. He was watching Marcus. And then, for a longer stretch of time, he was watching Willow. Not the way someone watches a person in distress. No concern telegraphed across his face. No furrowed brow. Just attentive. Quiet. Reading something in her stillness that most people in the room would not have known to look for. The particular quality of composure that only exists in someone who has swallowed the same thing enough times to do it without effort. Logan had grown up with a father who defined professionalism as the complete suppression of anything that looked like feeling. A Korean-American engineer who had built his career in rooms where he was perpetually underestimated and had responded by becoming so technically irreproachable that no one could find a legitimate angle of attack. Logan had learned the tactic by osmosis and had spent most of his 20s unlearning it, slowly recognizing that impenetrability was not strength, only load-bearing silence. He knew what it looked like from the inside. He recognized it in Willow without needing her to say a word. The meeting ended with action items. Willow received the most significant share. Nobody asked whether the timeline was manageable. The VP thanked Marcus for the clear summary. Chairs scraped back, people moved toward the door. Logan stayed seated for a moment. Then he closed his legal pad, picked it up, and walked, not to his desk and not to the elevator, but to the second-floor records terminal, where the project documentation system held archived communications going back 4 years. He typed in Willow Bennett's name, set the filter to the last 90 days, pressed enter. The email appeared at the top of the list. Time-stamped 6 weeks and 2 days ago. 3 attachments. Status. Read. No reply. He read it once, then again. Then he closed the terminal and walked, very deliberately, toward the 4th floor. Near Tiu. She heard him before she saw him. The specific quality of his footsteps, which she had apparently memorized without intending to. He arrived at her desk carrying 2 cups from the floor machine and set one on the corner of her desk. Same spot as always. She looked up. He sat in the chair across from her, set his own cup down and said without preamble, "Do you have the history of when this was reported?" Willow went still. The question was careful. Not, "I saw the email." Just the question, giving her the option. She looked at him for a moment, trying to find the angle. There was no angle she could identify. His expression was the same as it usually was. Attentive, direct, unhurried. "Why?" she said. "Because I think you do," he said. "And I think it matters." A silence. The spreadsheet on her monitor had 558 inconsistencies remaining at this particular moment. The coffee beside her was still warm. She looked at it, looked at him, and then opened her sent folder and turned her screen so he could see. He read it. All of it. The body of the email, the attached conflict summary, the risk parameters, the suggested protocol. She watched him read and said nothing. When he finished, he sat back and looked at his cup for a moment. "This needs to go into the project record," he said. "It won't change anything," she said. The words came out without bitterness. Just fact. Delivered flat, the way you state something you've already fully accepted. Maybe not for the meeting, he said. But it changes what this is. There's a difference between a crisis that came from nowhere and one that was preventable. That difference matters, for the record, and for whoever reads it after. She searched his face for an agenda. He wasn't performing sincerity. There was nothing effortful in it. He was simply saying what he thought, in the tone of someone who didn't say things that weren't true. She looked at the coffee he'd set on her desk, looked at the email thread on her screen. For 3 years, she had operated on the principle that doing the right thing was its own record, that competence spoke for itself, that the work would be visible eventually in the things that ran cleanly because she had run them. It had not occurred to her, or she had not allowed it to occur to her, that this was a belief constructed partly out of necessity, because asking someone to witness the work meant asking someone to pay attention to her in a way that felt, somehow, like exposure, like requiring something. Logan was not requiring anything from her in return. He had just found the email, read it, and walked across the building with a question. That was all. She uploaded the email and its attachments to the crisis documentation folder, tagged with the original timestamp. "Thank you," she said. "Professionally. Correct distance." He nodded and moved his chair back to his side of the desk cluster. Within 4 minutes, they were both working. Him on the integration conflict from the back end, her on the record audit. 2 people solving the same problem from opposite sides of its architecture. It was different from working alone. Not dramatically different, but perceptibly. The spreadsheet felt slightly less like a wall she was climbing, and more like a project with edges. At 5 p.m., the audit stood at 481 inconsistencies cleared. At 6 p.m., 390. Danny came back from the HR floor with the last of the 11 paper enrollment forms, photographed and transcribed. She glanced at Willow, then at Logan, then back at Willow, with an expression that Willow chose not to acknowledge. At 7:43 p.m., Marcus sent another message. Payroll must close by 9 a.m. Wednesday, not negotiable. Willow read it, typed a single-word reply. Understood. And opened the next cell in the spreadsheet. Number Tuesday. The floor thinned quickly after 8 p.m. A skeletal presence of 2 or 3 people on other projects, working quietly in different corners. By 9 p.m., it was effectively just Willow and Logan on the payroll side, the city at winter dark outside the windows, the office humming its low institutional hum. He got up at 9:15 p.m. and went to the floor machine. Came back with 2 cups, set one on her desk. Same corner. She put her hand around it without looking up, and then, she wasn't sure exactly what shifted, whether it was the accumulated specific weight of the night or something simpler. She said, "Logan." "Yeah. How long have you been doing that?" A pause. Not evasive. More like he was actually counting. "Since the quarterly review in October," he said. "You worked until 9 p.m. every night for 2 weeks, and you never once went to the machine yourself." She looked at him. He was not self-congratulating about this. He was just answering the question. "That's 3 months," she said. "I know." She looked back at her screen. The number 298 blinked in the inconsistency counter. She typed 4 corrections. She was aware that he had resumed working, that the familiar sound of his keyboard was back in the ambient soundscape of the room, that everything was exactly as it had been 30 seconds ago, except that she now knew something she hadn't known before. 3 months of coffees she had accepted without asking where they came from. 3 months of a small, warm, unremarkable kindness that she had received as part of the background of the floor, the way you receive the warmth of a building without thinking about the furnace. She understood, sitting with this new knowledge, that the receiving had been easy specifically because she had not questioned it. That she had the habit, specifically, of accepting small things without examining them. Because examining them meant acknowledging that someone was paying attention to her in a way she hadn't earned through performance. She thought about that. Not uncomfortably. More with the careful attention of someone discovering a detail they'd walked past 100 times and never stopped to read. She had a habit of not stopping. That was the detail. At 10 p.m., she picked up her coffee, drank it out of reflex, and set it back down. It had been cold for an hour. She had not noticed until she swallowed. She became, in that moment, acutely aware of what that meant. Not symbolically, but practically. That she was always somewhere else when she should have been here, always managing the next thing, always too busy with what needed doing to stop and feel what was already in her hands. The thought arrived, and she set it aside because there were still 241 lines in the spreadsheet. At 10:45 p.m., a junior colleague on the far side of the floor, Cal, who'd been assigned a small set of reconciliation tasks that afternoon, packed his bag, waved a general goodnight to the room, and left. Willow didn't look up. Logan glanced at the exit, and then at Willow, and said nothing. At 11:10 p.m., Logan set a post-it on the edge of Willow's keyboard. She peeled it off, read it. 4 words in small, clear handwriting. "Have you eaten anything?" She hadn't. Not since the granola bar at 2 p.m., which she'd eaten in 3 bites while reading a status update. She looked up. He was already back to his screen, not watching for her reaction, not waiting for credit. He pulled a granola bar from his desk drawer, the same brand, same flavor, she noticed, and set it beside the cup without looking at her. She ate it. They kept working. Then at 11:30 p.m., the system crashed. The screen went white. The spreadsheet vanished. The recovery dialog box appeared with the particular cold efficiency of software that does not care what the error cost. Unsaved data may be lost. 30 minutes of corrections gone. Willow stared at the screen. Logan, 3 seconds later, was already in the back-end logs. Nemwini. She rebuilt the lost data. He isolated the crash to a memory conflict in the integration module and patched it with a parameter override that would hold through the closing window. By 12:45 a.m., they had recovered everything lost in the crash and cleared another 40 lines. They worked with the concentrated low verbal efficiency of 2 people who had found a shared frequency. She called out inconsistency categories. He cross-referenced against the migration logs. Neither of them narrated what they were doing or described their process aloud. They just did it, in the way that people work when the work itself is the conversation. At 1:17 a.m., she found a second post-it on her laptop screen. She peeled it off and read it without comment, then looked sideways at him. He was already typing. The note said, "The override holds. You don't have to watch the logs anymore." She folded it and put it in her jacket pocket. By 2:30 a.m., the counter read 103. By 3:00 a.m., 41. The last 41 were the hardest. A cluster of records where the benefits categories had been reassigned mid-migration and needed to be traced back through 2 system states to their correct values. Logan built a lookup function that extracted the correct assignments from the pre-migration snapshot. Willow applied them one by one, checking each against the employee enrollment file. At 3:55 a.m., she corrected the last line. The system accepted the migration. The payroll queue loaded. The screen showed a clean summary. 847 records processed. 0 errors detected. Ready for payroll close. She looked at it for a moment without speaking. 847 people. A nurse on the south side with a car payment due Friday. A lab technician at the Irving Park Clinic whose daughter had a dentist appointment she'd been putting off. A receptionist who sent money to her mother in Puerto Rico every month on the 1st. Willow knew some of them by name. She knew all of them by the weight of what accurate payroll meant in concrete, specific terms. That weight was what had kept her in this chair for 11 hours 2 nights in a row. Not the numbers, the people behind them. The number was just the shape of the responsibility. 0 errors. She let that sit. Logan said quietly, "That's it." She let out a breath that had been somewhere in her chest since 7 a.m. 2 days ago. Not dramatic, not visible to anyone watching. Just a long, quiet exhale. The kind the body does when it finally believes the emergency is over. They sat in the completed silence of a solved problem for 90 seconds. Then she started organizing the documentation for the 9 a.m. deadline. Logan helped without being asked, pulling the supporting logs, formatting the resolution summary, printing the final report at 4:28 a.m. in a stack of 8 pages that she placed in a folder with 2 staples. In the elevator going down, neither of them spoke. The numbers descended, 4, 3, 2, L. The doors opened to the lobby, which at 4:30 a.m. was lit like an empty aquarium. She held the folder in both hands. He pressed the collar of his coat up against the cold that was already coming through the glass lobby doors. He said, "Go home." She went. Outside, the January air hit her like a wall, precise, indifferent, Chicago-specific in the way it found every gap in a coat and went directly for the skin. She walked toward the train and became aware, somewhere between the revolving door and the corner, that she was not currently holding something that could break. For the first time in weeks, nothing was on the edge. Nothing was about to fall. She was just a person walking through the cold at 4:30 a.m., holding a folder, with nothing left to fix tonight. She did not know what to do with that feeling. She took the train home. If you've ever been the person who carries everything until you physically can't, she sees you, and so does he. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss what comes next. Willow unlocked her apartment door at 5:07 a.m. Danny was on the couch in the dark living room. Not asleep, just sitting in the orange glow of the streetlights coming through the thin curtains, a mug in both hands. She had a key. She had been using it since 2 a.m., when she'd woken up at her own apartment, checked the time, thought about Willow still at her desk, and made the decision the way Danny made all her decisions, quickly and without overthinking it. She had made 2 mugs of tea. The second one had been cooling on the coffee table for 2 hours. She reheated it in the microwave when she heard the key in the lock. Willow walked in, still in her coat, folder under her arm, bun half dissolved from 11 hours of existence. She looked at Danny. Danny looked at her. No words for a moment, just the particular assessment that happens between 2 people who know each other's exhaustion well enough to read it at a glance. "Sit," Danny said. Willow sat. She put the folder on the table. She wrapped both hands around the mug and let the heat work its way through her palms. She told Danny about the night. The crash at 11:30 p.m., the recovery, the 8:47 lines reducing to 0, the final printout at 4:28 a.m. She told it the way she told most things, through the logistics, the sequence, the problem, and its resolution. Danny listened without interrupting, which was something she was very good at when the situation called for it. When Willow stopped talking, Danny said, "And Logan?" Willow said, "He helped." "Describe helped," Danny said. Her eyebrow was at its most precise angle. Willow described it. The chair pulled without asking. The Post-it. The coffees. 3 months of coffees. The granola bar. The silence that didn't ask anything from her. The way he'd patched the crash before she'd had time to process it had happened. Danny was quiet for a moment. Then she set down her mug and said, "Willow." Willow looked at her. "You are describing a man who stayed with you when you said you couldn't," Danny said. "When was the last time someone did that?" The words landed with the particular weight of something that doesn't need to be loud to be heavy. Willow looked at the mug in her hands. The tea was still warm. She wrapped her fingers tighter around it. She did not answer, because the answer was never. And they both knew it. And some things are too true to say out loud in a living room at 5 a.m. without their full weight falling on the floor between you. Danny did not push. She picked up her mug. She sat. She let the silence be what it needed to be, which was the thing Danny was uniquely good at when she chose to deploy it. The grace of not filling space that didn't need filling. Willow had known Danny for 3 years, which was long enough to understand that the raised eyebrow and the dry commentary were armor, the same way Willow's bun and her organizational systems were armor. The difference was that Danny knew she was wearing armor. She wore it consciously and with affection, and she took it off in small rooms at 5 a.m. without being asked. This was why they were friends. Danny said after a while, You know what I keep thinking about? Willow looked at her. October. When you worked those 2 weeks through the quarterly pre-close and you came to my place one night and I asked how you were doing and you said, fine, and then immediately started telling me about a data reconciliation issue and I let you because I was tired. She turned her mug in her hands. I've been thinking about that a lot lately, the way I just let you redirect it. Willow said, Danny, I don't need you to. I'm not confessing, Danny said. I'm saying he didn't let you redirect it. He just stayed, didn't he? Didn't ask you to explain anything. Just pulled up a chair and made himself useful, and stayed. She looked at Willow. When was the last time someone did that for you? With you. Not for the problem. With you. The apartment was quiet enough to hear the radiator tick. Willow held her mug with both hands and said nothing, because the answer was sitting right there in the room with them, clear and a little difficult to look at directly. An hour later, Willow was asleep on the couch without having meant to be, still in her coat, one hand under her cheek, the folder on the table beside her. At 7:02 a.m., her phone lit up on the coffee table. A message from Logan. System held through the night. Report accepted. Good work. She read it half asleep, face still against the couch cushion. Read it again, more awake. Lay there with the phone face up on the cushion beside her, looking at the words. She did not reply. She looked at the ceiling instead, at the familiar crack above the window she'd been meaning to report to the building management for 2 years, and she thought about a chair being pulled across a floor without asking permission. Wednesday afternoon. The wrap-up meeting was scheduled for 3 p.m. in the same third-floor conference room with the same fluorescent lights. Marcus arrived early again. Same silver pen. Same controlled posture. He had a new deck, 12 slides, corporate blue, titled Crisis Resolution Summary, Q4 Payroll System. The resolution, per slide 4, had been achieved through coordinated departmental response and systems integration support. Per slide 7, the payroll close had processed cleanly and on time. Per slide 9, key contributors to the resolution effort included the IT infrastructure team, the HR records department, and, specifically by name, with a moment of verbal emphasis, Cal Nguyen, junior data analyst, for his exceptional responsiveness during critical hours. Cal, who had arrived Tuesday afternoon, corrected 7 lines, and left before 10 p.m., received a sentence in Marcus's presentation. Willow Bennett and Logan Park were not mentioned. The report they had printed at 4:28 a.m., 847 lines, 0 errors, 8 pages, was credited to the payroll team, without a face, without a name, without a timestamp, without anything that would connect a solved problem to the specific people who had been awake at 4 a.m. solving it. Logan was in the room. He was at the back again. Same chair as Tuesday. Legal pad open this time. Pen not moving. He watched Marcus advance through the slides. Then he watched Willow. What he saw was not the contained fury of someone struggling to maintain composure. It was not disappointment pressing against a professional mask. What he saw, and it hit him somewhere undefended, was the complete absence of surprise. The face of a person who had walked into this room already knowing what it would contain, because this was not the first time, and she understood the shape of the pattern too well to be surprised by its return. No reaction, because none was required. The outcome had been factored in before she sat down. That practiced, exhausted neutrality, the competence of someone who had absorbed this exact dynamic so many times it no longer even registered as injustice, just weather, was the most truthful thing he had seen all week. He thought about his father's face in rooms where his work had been adopted without his name attached to it. The particular discipline of a person who has been underestimated so many times, they have learned to redirect their energy away from the hope of acknowledgement entirely. He recognized it with an accuracy that felt personal. He had spent years thinking that restraint was the same as dignity. It had taken him a long time to understand that staying silent did not change the pattern. It just made the pattern more comfortable for everyone perpetuating it. The meeting closed. People moved toward the door. Willow gathered her things with the same efficient composure she brought to everything, exchanged a look with Danny that was brief and complete, and left. Logan stayed in his chair after the room emptied. The last slide still glowed on the projection screen. Crisis Resolution Summary. Q4 Payroll System. The payroll team. No faces. No 4:28 a.m. Nothing. He looked at it for a long time. Then he opened his laptop, navigated to the project record, opened the resolution summary field, added 2 lines. Primary resolution work performed by Willow Bennett, payroll coordinator, and Logan Park, systems integration analyst. See attached communications record for full timeline, including pre-incident risk report filed 11/29. He attached the email, the resolution logs, and the 4:28 a.m. printout, which he had photographed on his phone before she filed it. He copied the VP of operations on the submission. He pressed send before the part of his brain that managed professional risk could make an argument. Then he closed the laptop, picked up his legal pad, and left. Thursday. Willow was at her desk by 7:30 a.m., bun secure, inbox open, working through the backlog that had accumulated during 2 days of crisis. A performance review due Tuesday. 3 deferred correspondence items. A budget reconciliation for Q1 that she'd moved to Friday and now needed by end of day. She worked through it with the methodical efficiency that people who had known her for more than a week recognized as her natural mode. Not fast, but precise and uninterruptible. The VP had responded to Logan's project record submission. She had seen the notification in her inbox at 6:55 a.m. on the train. She read it 3 times. The VP had acknowledged the documentation, noted the timeline of the original risk report, and indicated that implementation protocols would be reviewed before the next system rollout. He had thanked Willow and Logan both by name. She read it a 4th time, filed it, opened the performance review. Marcus said nothing to her all morning. He walked past her desk at 10:15 a.m. on the way to the elevator, adjusted the silver pen in his breast pocket, and did not slow down. She did not look up. The pattern completed itself, neatly and without drama. He had received the VP's note, recalibrated, and moved on. The record existed now. That was enough. At 2:17 p.m., her mother called. Willow answered because it had been 3 days of missed calls, and the silence between them was accumulating weight. Her mother's voice was different, more careful in its pacing, less immediate. She had been having chest pain since Monday. Her doctor had seen her Tuesday and ordered a stress test and an echocardiogram. Not an emergency, probably stress-related, but the tests were scheduled for next week, and in the meantime, there was the cost and the logistics and the specific texture of fear that a parent's voice carries when they are trying not to be a burden. Willow shifted into the mode she had spent most of her adult life operating from when her mother called. She asked for the doctor's name, the facility address, the insurance coverage details. She said, "I'll handle the scheduling." She said, "Don't worry about the cost." She ended the call and spent the next 47 minutes researching the cardiologist, calling the clinic's patient services line, filling out the pre-authorization form on the insurance portal, and sending her mother a formatted text message with every next step, sequenced and labeled. When she finished, her inbox showed Logan's email to the VP. She read it twice. Then she stood up, picked up her phone, walked to the women's restroom, and locked the corner stall door. She did not cry. She did not have a panic attack, or anything that would have had a clinical name. She just slid down the wall until she was sitting on the tile floor with her knees up and her back against the stall, and she stayed there. 20 minutes of absolute stillness in a clean, cold, locked room. All of it at once, arriving together now that there was no task left to redirect it. The all-nighter, the meeting, the missing names on the slide, the email from 6 weeks ago, her mother's careful voice, the years of being the person who handled it so that other people didn't have to. She thought about her mother. The woman had raised Willow largely alone, working 2 jobs across a decade without ever allowing herself to be seen struggling in a way that would frighten her daughter. Willow had been 12 when she first understood this. Had walked into the kitchen one evening to find her mother sitting at the table with a stack of bills and a face that was doing something careful and private. And when she saw Willow, she had straightened immediately, smiled, and asked what Willow wanted for dinner. The image had taken up permanent residence in the archive of things Willow carried without examining. She had learned, in that kitchen at 12, that the way you loved people was by not letting them see the weight. She had practiced it so thoroughly for so long that she had forgotten it was a choice she was making, rather than simply the shape of who she was. When she came out, she washed her hands and looked at her own face in the mirror for a long time. Not with distress, more with the kind of clear-eyed assessment you give something you've been avoiding looking at directly. Her phone buzzed on the counter. She looked down. "Logan Park, I saw you leave. I'm here if you need me." She stared at it, pressed the phone face down on the counter, picked it back up, did not delete the message, put the phone in her pocket, went back to her desk, picked up the performance review, kept working. She left at 7 p.m., which was early for her on a non-crisis Thursday by approximately 2 hours. The January air had a bite to it that went straight through the wool of her coat, and the train was crowded in the particular after-work way that Chicago trains are in winter, everyone compressed together by their own layers of outerwear. She stood in the center aisle and held the overhead bar and did not think about anything specific. She was good at that. She changed clothes at home, did not eat. Opened her laptop and let 12 browser tabs run in parallel. The insurance follow-up for her mother. The Q1 budget that still needed work. A payroll regulation update she'd been meaning to read since October. The couch was comfortable. The city pressed its sounds against the window. She was fine. At 8:47 p.m., the buzzer. She wasn't expecting anyone. She looked through the peephole. Logan Park stood in the hallway in his coat, a paper bag in one hand, the other hand at his side. The bag was from the Korean-Mexican place on Milwaukee Avenue. She had mentioned it once, in passing, in October, a conversation about food she'd had with him during the break room overlap that she had not thought about since. He apparently had. She opened the door. They looked at each other. He held out the bag and said, "You didn't ask. I came anyway." She stood in the doorway. The bag smelled exactly like her usual order, which she had definitely not told him, but which he had apparently correctly guessed or quietly researched. She searched her reaction for something reasonable. The reasonable reaction was to be slightly annoyed at the presumption. She was not annoyed. She was something else, something that did not have a clean name and that she did not currently have the infrastructure to manage. "You should have called," she said. "You wouldn't have said yes," he said. True. She stood in the doorway with the door open and the bag in front of her. He didn't push for entry, didn't lean in, didn't perform the gesture, just stood there, patient in that specific way of his, the way he waited for everything. And then, because she knew what she was about to do and could not stop the reflex once it was already moving, she accepted the bag with 2 hands, said, "Thank you, Logan." Her voice came out correctly, warm enough not to be rude, distant enough to be safe. "Good night." She closed the door. She stood in the dark hallway with her back against it. The bag was warm in her hands. The smell of the food she loved was in the air around her. She could hear, or maybe she imagined she could hear, his footsteps receding down the hallway, the elevator opening, then silence. She knew exactly what she had done. She had done it deliberately. She had done it because she had a reflex that had been built across years of managing alone, a reflex that activated precisely when something good got close enough to matter. Take it at arm's length, thank it correctly, close the door, stay in control of the distance. She slid down the wall and sat on the hallway floor, still in her coat. Opened the bag. Ate in the dark, alone, with the city pressing its nighttime sounds through the walls and the smell of food that someone had brought specifically for her because they had been paying attention for months. It was exactly the right order. He had gotten it exactly right, the way he got most things right, quietly, and without announcing that he had done so. She thought about the way Logan operated, the consistency of it. the specific grammar of his care. Always lateral, never frontal. Always within reach, never demanding to be received. He had spent 3 months bringing her coffee without once making her feel she owed him a conversation about it. He had found her email in the system archive and brought it to her without accusation. He had pulled his chair to her desk at midnight without asking if he could. Every gesture had that quality. Present without pressure, close without crowding. She had been interpreting it as professional consideration. She understood now that she had been interpreting it that way because the alternative required her to acknowledge that someone had been choosing her, consistently, in small daily increments, and that she had been accepting it without allowing herself to feel the full weight of what that meant. It was exactly the kind of thing she was not prepared to receive. It required nothing of her armor. It had no edge she could defend against. She ate every last bite. And when the bag was empty, and the hallway was quiet, and she was still sitting on the floor in her coat, she thought, I closed the door on something I didn't want to close the door on. She sat with that for a long time. Let it be true, without fixing it. A cold snap overnight had sheeted the sidewalks in a thin skin of ice that caught the morning light like hammered silver. Chicago in January was not subtle about its opinions. The sky was the particular pale gray of a city that had run out of warmth, and was not apologetic about it. Willow stopped at the corner cart for coffee on the way in. Something she did only when she had left early enough to stand still for 2 minutes, which she did this morning because she had not slept until 1 a.m., and woken at 5:30 and decided, somewhere between the alarm and the bathroom mirror, that she was done running slightly behind herself. The coffee was hot. She carried it in both hands up the street and through the revolving door and up to the 4th floor, and it was still warm when she sat down at her desk. Logan wasn't in yet. She worked for an hour. When he arrived, he hung his coat on the rack, went to the floor machine, and came back with 2 cups. He set one on her desk. Same corner, same wordless placement. She let him get settled. Let him open his laptop. Then, Logan. He looked up. The email you sent to the VP, she said. I didn't ask you to do that. No, he said. You didn't. A pause. Was it wrong? He asked. Not defensive. Genuinely asking. She looked at him. He was not apologizing. He was not retreating. He was just asking, which was, she had come to understand, how he operated, directly and without theater. She said, It was generous. That's not an answer, he said. I know, she said. She picked up the coffee, his coffee, the one from the floor machine, and held it in both hands, looking at the city through the 4th floor window. The buildings threw light at each other in the winter morning. Below, the frozen sidewalk was still catching the white glare of a sky that hadn't decided whether to snow. She said, I ate the food last night. A small pause. Good, he said. On the hallway floor. He didn't say anything right away. Then, next time you eat it at a table. The almost smile happened before she could stop it. She let it be there for a second, then turned back to her screen. That's a lot of confidence in a next time. I'm patient, he said. Simple. Not a performance of patience, just the statement of a fact he had demonstrated for 3 months. The morning moved. At noon, Marcus appeared in the corridor, saw Logan's name in the VP's reply chain on the meeting room screen, adjusted his pen, and kept walking. It was the closest thing to an acknowledgement the pattern would ever produce. Willow watched it happen and found she was not waiting for more. At 5 p.m., she closed her laptop. The floor was still half populated. She put on her coat, took down her bun, and let her hair settle around her shoulders. Not because it was comfortable at the end of a day, which it was, but because she simply did not reach for the bun again. She left without rearmoring. Logan was in the lobby. She saw him as the elevator opened, standing near the revolving door, coat on, not on his phone, not performing patience, just there, present in the specific unannounced way he had been present for months. He made no production of having waited. When she walked toward the exit, he didn't say anything, just fell into step beside her and through the revolving door and out onto the frozen sidewalk. The cold arrived like a statement. Both of them registered it at the same moment, breath becoming visible, and neither spoke for half a block. The sidewalk held the orange of the streetlights in its ice skin. The wind came from the lake, direct and unhurried. At the intersection, they stopped for the light. She looked at him sideways. He was looking at the street ahead, patient, waiting for the signal the way he waited for everything. The light changed. They stepped off the curb together, and somewhere in the middle of the crossing, she moved her hand to the edge of her coat pocket so that their knuckles touched, not grabbing, not declaring, just contact, present and warm through both layers of wool. She said, into the cold air, "I don't know how to do this." He said, "I know. It doesn't come naturally. I know that too." A beat. The far side of the street arrived under their feet. "I'm going to need you to be patient." He looked at her then, fully, without hurry, and said, "I already told you. I'm patient." She looked forward again. The street stretched ahead in the January dark, all orange light and frozen breath, and the particular silence of a city that keeps moving no matter what you decide. She kept walking. Her hair moved in the wind, loose and free, not tied back. She did not reach for it. This is what real love looks like. Not someone saving you, but someone staying. If this story moved you, leave a like and subscribe. We don't stop here. In the weeks after, neither of them rushed it. The professional structure remained. They were still Logan and Willow, still desk neighbors on the 4th floor, still the people who noticed the data irregularities before anyone else, and stayed longest on the difficult nights. The work was the same. The building was the same. But the grammar of their proximity had changed in the way that small, accurate things change. Not dramatically, but permanently. He still brought 2 coffees. She started drinking hers before it got cold. That was the first change, small and private and sufficient. Danny noticed it before either of them would have acknowledged it aloud. She noticed it in the way Willow laughed in the break room without editing the sound first. She noticed it in the way Willow answered Logan's questions with less of the precise professional distance she'd maintained for months, with slightly more room for ambiguity, slightly more permission to be approximate. Danny said nothing. She just stopped waiting for the other shoe to drop, which was its own form of relief. The VP's protocol review produced a new system implementation policy. Formal testing windows, defined change freeze periods around payroll close, a documentation requirement for pre-incident risk reports. The new policy was published on the internal portal in February. Willow's name was not in it, because policy documents do not record the people who made them necessary. She read it twice and filed it, and found she did not need her name to be there. The record existed. That was sufficient. Marcus recalibrated. Not dramatically, not humbly, just in the small, institutional way of someone who has registered a shift in the terrain beneath them. He began CCing Willow on communications that had previously circulated around her. His response times to her emails improved. He did not apologize. She did not expect him to. She updated the weight she gave his approval from relevant to irrelevant, and moved on without ceremony. On a Thursday evening in February, Logan and Willow were the last 2 on the floor again, not because of a crisis, but because they had both stayed past 6 p.m. on their own momentum, on different parts of the same quarterly preparation. At 7:45 p.m., he asked whether she wanted to get actual food at an actual table. She said yes. They walked down together, and through the revolving door, and the cold hit them simultaneously, and this time she did not manufacture distance between their steps. The restaurant was warm and small, and had paper napkins, a laminated menu with a burned corner, and a counter where the owners worked without separating themselves from the dining room by a wall. She ate her food while it was still hot. She held the warmth of it consciously, that small, deliberate noticing she had been practicing since the night on the frozen sidewalk. learning to stop long enough to feel what was already in her hands. She sat across from someone who had heard her whisper, "I can't," in a nearly empty office on a Tuesday night, and had not needed her to be performing anything other than what she was. And she understood, sitting there with her coat on the back of her chair and her hair loose and her food warm, that this version of herself was the one that deserved to be known. Not the woman who fixed 847 lines without sleeping. Not the woman who sent the email no one read. Not the woman who held a floor together with meticulous invisible work and never let the seams show. Just Willow, with a burned corner menu and food she could taste because she was actually there for it. Near the end of the meal, she said, "I used to think the hardest thing was doing it alone." He waited. It turns out the hardest thing is letting someone in when alone is all you know how to do. He looked at her and said, "How is it going so far?" She considered the question with the weight it deserved. Looked at the table, looked at him, said, "Better than I expected." He smiled. Not a performance of a smile, but the real, brief, warm kind. That's a start. Outside, the February wind came off the lake with its usual indifference. She had her coat on, her hair loose, and someone beside her who had decided, quietly, deliberately, without being asked or applauded, to stay long after the crisis had passed. It had never been about the system. It had been about who you become when someone refuses to let you carry it alone. About the version of yourself that surfaces, small and real and true, in the middle of a night when everything is broken, and you finally stop pretending it isn't. About the moment you discover that being seen in your exhaustion is not the same as being diminished by it, that the right person sees the exhaustion and stays anyway, not because they need you to recover, but because they chose to be there for the version of you that is still figuring that out. That version had been there the whole time. She just needed someone to pull up a chair. What she needed wasn't to be rescued. It was to be seen. Subscribe, leave a like, and come back for the next one.